As I said before in the last History 01 lecture, Hammurabi implemented his code in 1755 BC. Today, we're going to cover that code. I've left in the description below a link to the Code of Hammurabi, and honestly, I could just end this video right now and let you guys read it yourselves. But let me just briefly summarize what you can expect if you decide to read the entire code. For one, many of the laws threaten the death penalty, which you might associate with the Old Testament of the Bible. Indeed, it was not just the Old Testament that promoted the value of eye for an eye, because the prevalence of this value within the Code of Hammurabi shows that vengeance was very common in the ancient world, especially in the ancient Middle East. I don't yet know whether or not the Code of Hammurabi came before or after the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the Old Testament books that are the most well known for prescribing the death penalty. But as soon as I start lecturing on the history of the Bible, I will learn the exact time gap between the Code of Hammurabi and the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Maybe the Old Testament influenced the Code of Hammurabi, or vice versa, or maybe their authors wrote down capital punishment independently of each other. I don't know yet, but at least you now know that retributive justice was not unique to the ancient Israelites. Now, as much as the death penalty proponents would rather make slavery a capital offense, one of the capital offenses is helping slaves escape. That's right. We humans had a very primitive morality back then. To the Babylonians, slavery wasn't an abomination, but undermining it was. Before I further denounce Babylonian slavery, however, I should make clear that Babylonian slavery was not the same as American slavery. The vast majority of black slave families were tragically ripped apart, and it breaks my heart just thinking about it. However, the Babylonian slavery, on the other hand, did not separate families. The majority of Babylonian slave families stayed together because, according to an article in the Cornell Chronicle, which I have inserted into the description below, there's a history book that says that the vast majority of Babylonian slave families were nuclear or single-parent families. I haven't read the Code of Hammurabi in full detail, but if you guys see any law in that code that prohibits the separation of Babylonian slave families, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, there might have been some other Babylonian laws that prohibited such inhumane treatment of the slaves. Still, just because slave families weren't separated doesn't mean that the slaves themselves weren't beaten up on a regular basis. For example, law number 202 says, if anyone strike the body of a man higher in rank than he shall receive 60 blows with an ox whip in public. And law 205 says, if the slave of a freed man strike the body of a freed man, his ear shall be cut off. This means that if a slave dared to hit his master one time, the slave would be publicly whipped 60 times and lose his ear. This is not eye for an eye, but pure physical abuse of the slaves. Moreover, law number 282, the final law, says, if a slave say to his master, you are not my master, if they convict him, his master shall cut off his ear. In other words, if a court of law convicts the slave of simply rebelling against his master, as he had the moral right to do, then the poor slave has to lose his ear. For some reason, none of the scientific advancements in the Babylonian Empire ever led their most brilliant minds to conclude that slavery was abhorrent. However, those scientific advancements were genuine and real, and so therefore, we will indeed discuss Babylonian science in the next lecture of History 01. Right now, join me in a few minutes for a lecture about the mental experiences of thought in Psychology 01.